Hello everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In our last episode, we found that Queen Elizabeth's life was just as interesting as other decades in her life while she was in her 80s. She still made friends, and she enjoyed either going to their places to eat or having them as guests at her locations. The royal family got to know Lady Diana and liked her. The Queen Mother liked Diana and was happy that Prince Charles was going to get married. She wished that for all her grandsons. The Queen still had her stamina and managed to still go places she loved to visit, France and Canada. She even went to Canada, though she had slipped and hurt her leg right before she was to go there. She was in pain, but she managed to make it through. Near the end, we see the side of a critic of the Queen Mother, though he too could see her charm somewhat. So let's see what's going on today. We start off today's episode with the critic that we had mentioned earlier, Lise Milne, the critic of the Queen Mother. He was wary when the novelist Penelope Mortimer came to interview him for yet another biography of the Queen Mother, and she had brought a tape recorder, and it made him so nervous that the whizzing kept him from being discreet about her. Mortimer's diary was the most unsympathetic ever written about the Queen Mother. Writing of Queen Elizabeth's many charitable appearances, Mortimer said, "The Queen Mother's image is dressed, coiffed, transported, deposited. When the performance is over, it is fetched, deposited, fed, cleaned, and put away carefully for the night. If the Queen Mother beckons, someone notices. If she calls, someone comes. All she has to do when she drops fresh as a daisy from the sky is to generate love, delight, and enthusiasm. It may be increasingly difficult octogenarian to climb into the helicopter, but once airborne, the flight is effortless, skimming over the dull pedestrian world, skimming over the empty spaces and uneasy silences, over neglect and indifference, landing only where the lights shine, and the climate is entirely dependable. One day she will simply spin out of sight, emerging God knows where, to carry on with the angels." But there were other authors whom she helped with their books. She assisted Kenneth Rose with his well-received biography of George V. Rose, diarist extraordinaire of the Daily Telegraph, was one of the few journalists she trusted. He sent her flowers with kind notes on her wedding anniversary every year. She also talked to her friend, the Cambridge historian Professor Owen Chadwick, in preparation for his book Britain and the Vatican during the Second World War. One of her great new friends of her 80s was Ted Hughes. They met when he spoke at the King's Lynn Festival, and Queen Elizabeth invited him and his wife Carol to dinner at Sandringham. Hughes was a dedicated countryman and fisherman. Queen Elizabeth liked that sort of person, and she also found his looks tall, craggy, and well-built very striking. Hughes wrote to his brother after one visit to Burke Hall that the morale and general spirits in her group is incredibly high, and she never alters in the slightest way, interested in everything, amused by everything. Her secret is one of her secrets, to be positive about everything. Another must be pretty strong. She climbs about the steep gardens, stands and walks for hours at a time. There's something about her that's kept very young, like a young woman, but everybody is so fond of her that she escapes the psychological isolation, for the most of people inescapable. The Queen Mother was never isolated. Through this decade, she watched with pleasure and sometimes with concern her grandchildren growing older and her great-grandchildren's infancy. She continued with her private trips to France and with her official visits abroad, particularly to Canada. The pattern of her years remained much the same as it had always been, with the regular commitments to her charities, her regiments, her ships, and of course, her horses. In the spring of 1982, the Queen Mother carried out her military obligations, presenting shamrock to the Irish Guards at Pierbright on March 17th, and visiting her regiment, first the Queen's Dragoon Guards in Northern Ireland, at the end of April. Earlier that month, an unexpected war had broken out when Argentina seized the Falkland Islands, a British colony in the South Atlantic. The British government immediately declared its intention of regaining the islands. A task force was prepared and dispatched. Prince Andrew went out with the force as a naval helicopter pilot in HMS Invincible. Queen Elizabeth had a horror for war and wrote to the Queen, "One feels such a dark cloud in one's mind over the Falklands," and she longed for a solution to be found. In early June, she lunched privately with Mrs. Thatcher at Chequers, the Prime Minister's official country residence. And shortly afterwards, President and Mrs. Reagan arrived in England for an official visit, during which the American leader made clear his support for the British determination to recapture the Falklands. Queen Elizabeth attended the banquet for the Reagans at Windsor Castle. The war ended with British victory on June 14th. Queen Elizabeth was supposed to fly by helicopter from Royal Lodge to Margate for the start of her Cinque Ports visit on June 8th, but one engine failed after takeoff and the helicopter had to make an emergency landing. The Queen Mother wasn't alarmed, and after lunch at home, she took a plane of the Queen's flight from Heathrow to Marston in Kent instead. The Queen Mother had a busy summer. It included a visit to the Barnard Castle in County Durham to open 3 galleries at the Bowes Museum. She traveled to Glasgow for the centenary service of the St. Andrew's Ambulance Association and a visit to the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, and she paid a 2-day visit to Germany to see her regiments, the 9th and the 12th Royal Lancers and the 1st Battalion, the Black Watch. On July 16th, she returned to Scotland to celebrate the centenary of the University of Dundee, and on July the 26th, she attended the Falklands Thanksgiving service at St. Paul's Cathedral before driving to Sandringham for the King's Lynn Festival and her usual July house party. Her birthday that year was even more special because Prince William, the first son of the Prince and Princess of Wales, was christened by the Archbishop of Canterbury at Buckingham Palace. After the ceremony, the family celebrated both events at a lunch at the palace, and towards the end of her Scottish holidays, she paid her annual visit to the Lord Roberts workshops for disabled soldiers in Dundee, and then she named a British Railways locomotive the Queen Mother at Aberdeen, and attended the Perth bull sales, where she was delighted that her Aberdeen Angus bull won Reserve Junior Champion. Back in London, she and Princess Margaret acted as councillors of state while the Queen was in Australia. She wrote to her daughter, "Thinking of you in great heat and chiffon, I write as unusual in a downpour of rain and thick wool," and sent her horse news mostly bad at this point. She had been following the tour on television and thought of how hard the Queen worked compared to how little she was doing. The Queen Mother, though, she'd been busy too, but she had to take a rest because during a shooting weekend at Royal Lodge, a fishbone lodged in her throat at dinner one evening, and she had to have an operation to remove it. Letter and flowers arrived from many people, including Margaret Thatcher, who sent affectionate good wishes from everyone at 10 Downing Street, and Lord Snowdon. "Do look in if you are down our way. It would be lovely to see you," she wrote back to him from Royal Lodge. "A thousand thanks, your ever affectionate ex-mother-in-law." After 2 weeks, she was able to resume her public life. In early December, went to Southampton to visit the liner Queen Elizabeth II, the Cunard's successor to Queen Elizabeth, which she had launched in 1938. And she unveiled a plaque to mark the ship's role as a troop carrier in the Falkland Islands. After 2 weeks, she was able to resume her public life, and in early December went to Southampton to visit the liner Queen Elizabeth II, the Cunard Line's successor to Queen Elizabeth, which she had launched in 1938. And she unveiled a plaque to mark the ship's role as a troop carrier in the Falklands War. On St. Patrick's Day 1983, she flew to Munster in West Germany to present Shamrock to the Irish Guards stationed there. The cheers they gave her were deafening and straight from the heart. In April, Queen Elizabeth opened a luncheon club and day centre for the West Indian elderly in Railton Road, Brixton, part of South London with a large West Indian population. There had been violent riots there in 1981, and the mayor of Brixton had asked her to make this visit as a way of restoring confidence in the area. She toured the building while children danced and sang to a steel band. The visit was a success, and the director of the Brixton Neighborhood Community Association thought that she had kindled a ray of hope for the future of our neighborhood. The most significant public event of her 83rd year was her visit to Northern Ireland, still having troubles. She had gone there in 1958, and it was more peaceful then, and she visited the Territorial Auxiliary and Volunteer Reserve Association for Northern Ireland for their 50th anniversary. Now she was asked to go there again to celebrate their 75th anniversary. She decided to go, but after the news was leaked to the press, the visit had to be canceled. It was then quietly rearranged, and she flew to Northern Ireland to preside over the association's parade at St. Patrick's Barracks, Ballymena, on Monday, the 20th of June. Afterwards, General Sir Robert Richardson, General Officer commanding Northern Ireland, wrote that her determination to cope despite the press leaks and threats from the Irish Republican Army impressed everyone, yet again with her personal courage. The visit was a triumph. In March 1984, she unveiled a memorial in Westminster Abbey to Noel Coward, whose wit had given her so much pleasure and whose death in 1973 she had much regretted. On June the 5th that year, she honored her hero, General de Gaulle, unveiling a blue plaque on his wartime residence in Carlton Gardens. And on the evening of July 30th, she was quietly admitted to King Edward VII Hospital in Marylebone. She underwent a simple excision of carcinoma of the breast, and the doctors were confident that the entire tumor had been removed. Her spirits were high, and her lady-in-waiting's diary recorded that she came home on the morning of August in very good form, then dived gaily into the celebrations of her 84th birthday. Queen Elizabeth spent her 85th birthday at Sandringham. The crowd at the Church of Matins was so large that the service was relayed to those who couldn't get inside. That evening she enjoyed a concert by the Russian cellist Mstislav Rostropovich and a high-spirited dinner party which included the Queen, Princess Margaret, and the Prince of Wales. After dinner she danced with Sir Frederick Ashton to music played by the Russian maestro. The Prince of Wales wrote to her afterwards of his delight in you and Freddie dancing that demented scarf dance to the accompaniment of Rostropovich's equally demented mazurka. The next day in London, she was greeted by large crowds outside Clarence House, and on August the 6th, she was treated to a birthday present by British Airways, a 2-hour flight in Concorde up to Scotland and back. Now she could say that having started her life in the horse age, she was a supersonic traveler. She went back to the Castle May in a more normal flight the following day, and in the summer in Scotland followed its usual pattern of guests, fishing, stalking, shooting, picnics, racing demon, and favorite videos in the evenings. Through the 1980s, the Queen Mother had remained remarkably healthy. She still swore by her herbal and homeopathic medicines and powders. Her biggest problem were the lesions on her legs, and she suffered occasional obstructions in her throat. In August of 1986, she choked at dinner one night at May and refused all help till the Britannia arrived the next day. She reluctantly accepted a visit from the ship's doctor. She was in a lot of discomfort, but said that there was no need to make a fuss. Finally, she agreed to be flown by helicopter to the hospital in Aberdeen, where she was x-rayed and kept overnight. The lady-in-waiting's diary recorded that the doctors were amazed by her resilience and an attitude to what had been a very unpleasant, painful episode. Prince Charles wrote to tell her how relieved he was that she was all right, and asked her to be more careful with fish dishes in the future. The rest of the holiday at May passed without incident, and then, as usual, she went south to Balmoral and Birk Hall. In October, she stepped on what she said was a dead but vicious piece of wood while walking in Scotland. It seemed like a mere graze at first, but when she got back to London, her doctor advised that she should avoid standing, but she cheerfully ignored it. By November the 7th, her leg became inflamed. She insisted on carrying out her usual Remembrance Day engagements, but she had to go to the hospital again for 5 days, and to her regret, cancel one of her favorite excursions, lunch with Charles and Kitty Farrell. So I will end the video here because the next part of the book, Queen Mother, has the Queen Mother going to Canada for the last time. So that deserves to be seen at the beginning of the next video. In this episode, the Queen Mother in her 80s seemed to be a little dynamo. She believed in natural medicine and reluctantly went to the hospital when she needed to. 2 occasions she had to go because she had trouble with fish bones, and then she had leg lesions which caused her pain. She traveled to Ireland a few times, and she kept up her usual pattern of travel from Castlemaine and on to her other places of residence. She amazed those that saw her in action because of all the energy she had. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. I want to wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.